Hey guys, tonight we begin in the shadowed halls of the Vatican, not the bustling, sun-drenched squares of modern Rome, but a quieter, more candlelit version. You're standing at the edge of something ancient, something gilded with time and incense. You can almost feel the cool marble under your bare feet, hear the soft flutter of robes passing through archways, and somewhere in the distance, the heavy toll of a cathedral bell, deep, slow, like a heartbeat from the past. This isn't a journey through saintly devotion or quiet humility. No, tonight we drift into the other side of that holy coin. The cracked side, the scandal side, the side where the men who were meant to shepherd souls sometimes behaved more like wolves in velvet slippers. You're about to visit the worst popes in history. Now, you might think of the papacy as a sacred office held by selfless men guided by prayer and humility, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For centuries, this position wasn't just spiritual, it was political, and power, as it tends to do, attracted some very colourful personalities. Ambition disguised as holiness, corruption cloaked in crimson robes, and enough drama to fill a medieval soap opera that never ends. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet move soundlessly across worn stone tiles. The air smells of wax and time. Paintings stare down from walls so old they practically hum with whispered regrets. This is where it all begins, the sleepy throne of St. Peter. It wasn't always marble and magnificence. In the early days, the papacy was a fragile thing, persecuted, chased from city to city. But once it found its footing, once emperors started listening and kingdoms started kneeling, the office of the Pope became something more than spiritual. It became tempting, too tempting for some. The worst popes in history didn't just have bad tempers or odd habits. They wielded their power like kings, played politics like gamblers, and occasionally forgot they were supposed to be holy. Some made questionable decisions, others made decisions that still echo through the vaults of the Vatican in ways that make archivists shiver a little. The funny thing is, historians still argue whether some of these popes were truly as terrible as legend says, or just victims of political smear campaigns centuries old. But then again, when you're holding a trial for a dead man or selling salvation for spare change, it's hard to spin that into a positive Yelp review. Tonight, you won't be jolted by action or chased by historical villains. No, you'll wander quietly through dusty passages and forgotten halls, guided by candlelight and curiosity. You'll peer into chambers where secrets were whispered, treaties were signed in blood, and occasionally sins were dressed up in silk. And through it all, you'll learn that even in a place built on faith, humanity has a way of slipping in, messy, flawed, and strangely fascinating. Let's keep walking. The next door creaks open, and behind it a pope is preparing to put a corpse on trial, but we'll get to that shortly. For now, just listen to the echo of your steps in this ancient place. So much history beneath your feet, so many quiet scandals wrapped in brocade. Sleepy history has only just begun. Section 2. You step into a cold, dimly lit chamber. The air hangs heavy, and it smells faintly of mildew and old fabric, like a room that's been sealed for centuries and only recently disturbed. There's a strange hush here, not the sacred kind, but the kind that tiptoes around something unnatural, a courtroom, but not for the living. Here, under flickering torchlight, Pope Stephen VI is preparing to try a corpse. Yes, really, it's the year 897. You're standing inside the Basilica of St. John Lateran, Rome's cathedral before St. Peter's took the spotlight. The place feels half church, half shadow theatre. Wooden benches creak under the weight of confused clergy. And at the centre of it all, sitting on a throne like a tragic marionette, there he is, the dead Pope, Formosus. Deceased for 9 months, exhumed from his grave, now propped upright and dressed in full papal regalia. Stephen VI paces like an angry ghost. He's been Pope for less than a year, but already he's seething with fury. And paranoia. You see, before Stephen came to power, Formosus had crowned a rival emperor. That didn't sit well with Stephen's faction. So, in a move that historians still argue whether it was madness, vengeance, or pure theatre, Stephen decided to put the rotting former pope on trial. They called it the Cadaver Synod. You can't stop staring. The corpse is missing fingers, cut off after death as punishment for blessing the wrong people. His skin is grey-blue, tight on the bone, lips drawn back in a grin that makes it look like he's enjoying this absurd performance. A deacon stands beside him and answers for him in a monotone voice, like a medieval ventriloquist act gone horribly wrong. Charges: perjury, breaking canon law, usurping the papal seat. Punishment: posthumous humiliation, of course. Formosus is stripped of his garments, the 3 fingers used for blessings are hacked off again for good measure, and his body is thrown into the Tiber River, like yesterday's bad decision. You glance at Stephen Sixt. His face is pale with triumph, but his eyes betray a man who's already unraveling. The crowd isn't pleased. The whole affair feels wrong. The people begin to whisper. Even in a city that's seen emperors fall and saints burned, this feels like a step too far. And it is. Within months, Stephen is imprisoned. Rumours swirl. Some say he was strangled in his cell by those who thought he'd brought shame to the throne. Others whisper darker things about curses and river spirits and Formosus' revenge. All you know is that the papal throne, already shaky, now seems cursed, tainted by the memory of a pope who couldn't even rest in peace. The Vatican, you realize, is no stranger to spectacle. Even the Holy Seat can become a stage when power and resentment dance together long enough, and tonight that stage is a damp hall filled with nervous murmurs and the faint stench of decay. As you drift deeper into the corridors of history, you wonder what drove Stephen to such a grotesque performance. Was it madness, political survival, or did he truly believe the dead could be tried for crimes of the soul? A light joke if your brain's still awake. Maybe Stephen just really hated Mondays and took it out on whoever was nearby, dead or alive. But seriously, imagine being so angry at someone that you dig them up just to yell at them. You pass a tapestry depicting saints in golden halos. Behind it, you swear you hear whispers. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe the past is still gossiping. Historians debate to this day what Stephen was thinking. Some say he was pressured by Formosus' enemies. Others argue he wanted to erase every trace of his predecessor to solidify his own claim to the papacy. But whatever the reason, one thing is certain: the Cadaver Synod marked one of the lowest, weirdest points in papal history. You shuffle onward, slippers scuffing faintly on cold stone. Another chamber opens to your left, empty now but once filled with cardinals shifting uncomfortably in their seats, pretending not to smell the corpse. You can almost picture it. The way the light from the high windows failed to touch the body, the way even the statues of saints seemed to look away. You pause by a carved wooden bench. Sit for a moment. It creaks under your weight like it remembers heavier secrets. The Vatican is filled with silent furniture, pieces that have witnessed more than anyone alive. Outside, you hear the soft splash of the Tiber. Formosus' body didn't stay submerged. It washed ashore and was eventually retrieved by sympathetic monks. Later popes declared the trial null, his body reburied with honours. Still, the stain lingered, because once you put a corpse on trial, the line between sacred duty and personal vendetta starts to blur. And once that line blurs, it's hard to draw it again. You rise and keep walking, past shuttered archways, through slanted beams of moonlight. The Vatican by night is quieter than you expected, but not peaceful. Not really. Peace requires honesty. And here in these halls, history prefers to murmur rather than confess. You pass a statue of Peter holding keys. His face is serene. You wonder what he would have thought, seeing one of his successors yelling at a decaying predecessor. Probably would have dropped the keys and walked off. As you descend a worn staircase, the air gets cooler. A single candle flickers near a door marked in Latin. You press your palm to the wood. It opens. Another pope waits behind it, younger, wild-eyed. But that's for next time. For now, just breathe. Let the cold stone walls wrap around you. You've just witnessed one of the most surreal trials in history, and somehow the night is only getting stranger. Section 3, you step out of the cold chamber of cadavers and scandal and into something somehow more bizarre. Youthful recklessness in a gilded chair. The corridor ahead feels warmer, but not in a comforting way. It's the warmth of flickering candles in a crowded banquet hall, perfumed air, spilled wine, laughter that echoes off marble walls like a joke no one remembers telling. You're walking toward the bedroom of the teenage Pope, John XII. The name floats toward you like a secret someone wasn't supposed to say out loud. And yet, there it is. written in the dust of a velvet curtain embroidered in fading gold on a cushion left in the corner of an empty throne room. Pope John the XII? Crowned at 18, and by many accounts unfit from day one. You enter the room and it's not a chapel, it's a palace suite. Pillows strewn about, a silver chalice tipped over near a robe tossed carelessly to the floor. You can almost hear the music, lutes, laughter, feet dancing on stone. This wasn't a place for prayer, this was a place for pleasure. John was born Octavianus. He became pope not by merit but momentum. His father was powerful, his family entrenched in Roman nobility, and the papacy by then was less about the Holy Spirit and more about controlling Rome like a chessboard. And so at 18, the boy became pope. He ruled the church the way a drunken teenager might run a casino. You take another slow step. The floors are scattered with remnants of excess, wine stains, torn lace, and the faint scent of incense burned not for God, but for mood. Contemporaries accused John XII of turning the Lateran Palace into a brothel. That's not metaphor, that's the actual accusation. It's said he held orgies where holy relics were used as party props. He was rumoured to have invoked pagan gods during games, toasted to Bacchus instead of Christ, and in one infamous whisper was caught toasting the devil himself. Is that true? Well, historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerations crafted by his enemies, of which he had many. Some say he was framed, that it was smear politics at its most brutal, but even the more conservative scholars admit that young John was at the very least reckless, inattentive, and tragically unsuited to wear the fisherman's ring. There's something deeply strange about standing in the imagined aftermath of his reign. It doesn't smell like incense and piety, it smells like too many candles burning too long, like things left to spoil. And here's your first soft, sleepy laugh of the night. Legend says John once ordained a deacon in a stable while intoxicated, and another time he played dice with friends during Mass. You imagine that, Jesus on the altar and John hunched over bones shouting, "Double six!" Now that's spiritual multitasking. But power doesn't tolerate distraction for long. His wild behaviour angered bishops, clergy, and even the Holy Roman Emperor. In 963, the Emperor Otto I deposed John, replacing him with another pope entirely. Of course, John did what any responsible religious leader might do after losing his seat. He gathered an army, marched on Rome, and took it back by force, because, obviously, divine authority works best at sword point. John XII's final chapter is as absurd as his reign. He died at 27, and the official story, he was killed by a stroke. The unofficial one, he died in bed, caught in the act with another man's wife. Her husband, returning home, supposedly struck John over the head. Whether it was a jealous husband or a stroke from above, we'll never know. But either way, the curtains closed quickly on a papacy that felt more like a fever dream than a reign. You step back into the hallway, leaving behind the air of perfume and poor decisions. There's a hush in this corridor, like even the stones are trying to forget. Somewhere nearby, a statue of Mary stares down silently. You wonder if she ever blinked during those years, ever looked away. The damage of John's reign wasn't just in spectacle, it was in trust. The church, already tangled in politics, now seemed vulnerable to the whims of youth and lust. His story remains a cautionary tale, etched into the footnotes of Vatican archives and the deeper folds of stained glass memory. You walk on, past tapestries dulled by smoke, past paintings of saints who seem to glance away at your approach. The Vatican is quiet again, but not peaceful. A quiet like the one after thunder, a moment of silence holding its breath. In a room just ahead, another pope waits, older this time but no wiser. He's been pope before. He'll be pope again, and in between, he'll sell the chair beneath him like a used carriage at a roadside stall, but you'll meet him soon enough. For now, let the echo of youth fade behind you. The laughter is gone, the music silent. All that remains is the soft memory of what happens when you hand the keys of heaven to someone who'd rather use them to unlock the wine cellar. You pause, let the walls press in gently. Let the weight of time settle around your shoulders. You've met Pope John XII, and somehow he wasn't even the worst of them. Section 4. The corridor curves now, gently like a question mark wrapped in velvet. The footsteps you imagine aren't yours anymore. They belong to someone else. Someone returning not once, not twice, but 3 times to the most powerful seat in Christendom. You're about to meet a pope who couldn't stay gone, no matter how many times the church tried to move on. His name is Benedict IX, and yes, he was pope 3 separate times. 3. You drift through a cool archway into a modest room, dimly lit by a single oil lamp. The space is quieter than the others. Not solemn exactly, just tired. A room that has seen too much and would very much like to be left alone. There's a plain wooden throne against the far wall, worn smooth by restless decisions. It waits like a witness. Benedict IX was first elected pope in 1032 at around the age of 20, or maybe 18, or 11. No one agrees. Records from the 11th century are frustratingly vague, like someone smudged the ink on purpose. What's clear is this: he was far too young, and far too connected. You see, Benedict came from the powerful Tusculum family, which had already produced multiple popes. Think of them as the medieval Vatican's answer to dynastic lobbying. Being born into that clan meant you didn't just inherit land, you inherited influence. And sometimes, apparently, you inherited the papacy before you could legally drink wine. The first thing people noticed about Benedict IX wasn't his theology, it was his behavior: wild, immoral, indifferent. One chronicler wrote that he committed many vile adulteries and murders. Another simply called his life so shameful, so foul, so execrable that I shudder to think of it. You raise your eyebrows at that last one. When a medieval monk shudders, you know it's serious. Historians still argue how much of that is exaggerated. Some say he was more of a political pawn than a villain. But most agree he was a mess, more interested in parties and politics than prayer, and yet he held on to the papacy until he didn't. Because at some point, either out of boredom, fear, or possibly an urgent need for cash, Benedict IX decided to sell the papacy. Yes, you heard that right, sell it. You're standing in a room once occupied by a man who literally sold the papal throne like a summer home. Around 1045, he made a deal with his godfather, the archpriest John Gratian. Gratian was an honourable man, apparently shocked by the scandal swirling around his godson. Wanting to clean up the church, he agreed to buy the papacy, yes, buy it, for a hefty sum, hoping to restore order, and Benedict agreed, took the money. Stepped aside, Gratian became Pope Gregory VI. You almost laugh aloud. Because really, what's more awkward than buying the papacy from your own godson, especially when the sale might be considered simony, literally the sin of selling church offices? But of course it didn't end there. Benedict had second thoughts. Or maybe he just ran out of money. Either way, he came back, marched into Rome with his supporters, declared himself pope again, and reclaimed the throne. Again, at this point the church was thoroughly exhausted. For a while, 3 different men claimed to be pope. It was a papal traffic jam, and everyone was honking their theological horns. Eventually, in 1046, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry III stepped in. He held a synod, one of those emergency church meetings where things get loud, and declared all 3 popes invalid. Benedict was excommunicated. The throne finally was cleared. You take a slow breath. It's astonishing, really, how calmly this room holds the weight of all that absurdity. 3 reigns, 1 resignation, 1 sale, 1 attempted comeback, and a final excommunication. Even the stone underfoot seems embarrassed, and yet, somehow the church survived it, because it had to. Let's take a soft detour for a moment. Imagine if this happened today. A pope putting his title up for bid. An online auction, maybe. Authentic Vatican papacy, slightly used, no refunds. Bidding starts at 30 gold coins and 1 morally ambiguous godfather. There's humour here, of course, but also something deeper, a sadness almost. A young man handed power too soon, a church tangled in politics so deeply that holiness became negotiable. You don't need incense to feel that weight. Just silence, the kind that seeps into you like cool marble. You glance at the throne in the corner. Still there, still empty. Benedict IX is remembered as one of the worst popes in history. Not just for what he did, but for how he treated the office, like a game, a prize, a coin purse, and in doing so, he reminded the world that even sacred titles can be hollow if worn without reverence. You step back into the corridor, the light behind you fading like a scandal slowly forgotten. Ahead, you hear the distant clink of armour. The popes you've met so far were indulgent, unhinged, scandalous, but the next one, he's ready for war. For now, walk gently, let the stones rest beneath your feet. Let the whispers settle. You've just walked alongside a man who held the keys to heaven 3 times and dropped them each time. Section 5. The corridor narrows now, ceiling lowering just slightly, as if to remind you you're descending, not into a dungeon, but into something more subtle. Ego, the weight of a crown no man was meant to wear alone. You feel it in the stone beneath your steps, in the painted saints whose eyes seem a little wearier here. This is where ambition got louder than humility. Pope Boniface VIII awaits. You pass beneath a faded inscription carved into the archway. Unam sanctum. It means one holy. A reference to the doctrine Boniface would declare in 1302, insisting that submission to the Pope was necessary for salvation. Necessary. You raise your eyebrows. Subtlety, it seems, was not one of his strengths. Boniface wasn't born into power. He took it carefully, methodically, and once he had it, he held it like a man who feared the world might notice he wasn't actually God. You enter a small chamber lined with old scrolls and the ghost of incense. This was a pope who loved paper. Decrees, bulls, proclamations, his words flowed out like thunder. But it wasn't peace he was after. It was supremacy. By the late 13th century, the church was no longer just a spiritual guide, it was a political heavyweight. Kings bowed, armies listened, and popes like Boniface tried to turn spiritual influence into temporal dominance. Boniface came to power in 1294 after convincing Pope Celestine V, a gentle, pious monk, to resign. Celestine had been pope for only 5 months, and Boniface whispered to him through legalese and pressure that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't cut out for the job. Celestine agreed. Then Boniface locked him in a tower for the rest of his life. You pause by a narrow window just wide enough to imagine the sky from a cell. There's something cold about it, even now, like ambition doesn't need to raise its voice to be cruel. Boniface's reign was marked by conflict. Especially with Philip IV of France. You'll meet him again later, but for now know this. Philip taxed the clergy, Boniface got angry, Boniface issued bulls, Philip burned them. The Pope insisted on total authority over kings. Kings, unsurprisingly, disagreed. In one particularly bold moment, Boniface claimed that just as the moon gets its light from the sun, all earthly power must get its light from the Pope. It sounded poetic. It also made a lot of people want to throw him into a moat. A quiet chuckle escapes you. It's amazing what people used to fight about, but then again, it always comes back to the same thing. Who gets to tell everyone else what to do? The conflict with France escalated until it exploded. In 1303, agents of King Philip, led by a man named Guillaume de Nogaret, stormed the Pope's residence in Anagni. They arrested Boniface. The Pope, aging and alone, was reportedly slapped in the face by a soldier. The event became known as the Outrage of Anagni. There's debate about that slap. Some say it was symbolic, others say it was literal. Either way, the impact was real. Boniface never recovered. He was rescued days later by locals, but he died shortly after, bitter and broken. You step into the imagined throne room of Anagni. It's quiet here, too quiet, a place where echoes linger longer than they should. Where even pride eventually runs out of breath. Boniface's legacy is strange. He was powerful, yes. Intelligent, fearless in some ways, but his insistence on absolute authority led the church into a dangerous corner. And it set the stage for darker chapters to come. Want a light moment? Here you go. Boniface declared a jubilee year in 1300, encouraging pilgrims to come to Rome for spiritual indulgence and forgiveness. The turnout was massive, so massive that guards had to beat back crowds at St. Peter's with sticks to keep order. Heaven, it seems, had a very long line that year. He also had a thing for grand entrances. During that jubilee, he dressed in full regalia and rode a white horse through the city, while waving to crowds like an emperor. Humble fisherman of souls indeed. You shake your head, smiling. Popes dressing like Caesar. What could go wrong? Historians still argue whether Boniface was a hero of church unity or a tyrant in silk slippers. Some admire his strength in defending papal supremacy. Others see him as the man whose pride cracked the foundation. You press your hand against the cool stone wall. It's smoother here, worn from years of pilgrims passing through. Maybe some of them came to pray. Maybe others just came to look at the throne and wonder what kind of man would sit on it and declare the world must obey. Power has a way of distorting its own reflection. In Boniface's time, the Pope wasn't just a pastor, he was the master of kings, the final word, the untouchable voice of heaven. Or so he said, but as you step back into the corridor, you feel it shift slightly, like the floor itself sighs in relief to be done with him. Ahead, a new hall opens, and this time the lights flicker differently. 2 popes. One Rome, one Avignon. The church begins to fracture, not because of heresy, but because of ego. Because 2 men, both claiming the title of pope, both issuing orders, both excommunicating each other, couldn't agree on who God loved more. You'll step into that tug of war next, but for now, pause. Listen to the stillness that always follows the fall of the proud. Let your breath match the rhythm of ancient stone. The wind outside hums gently now, and for a brief moment the Vatican rests. You've just walked with Boniface VIII, a man who tried to sit above kings and wound up brought low by a single open palm. Section 6. You step into a long, narrow corridor now. The air is colder, not because of stone or draft, but because of division. It's a different kind of chill, the one that comes when unity splits down the middle. The candlelight flickers less confidently here. You're entering the time of 2 popes. Sometimes 3, sometimes none at all. The Avignon papacy and the era of anti-popes. You pause before a heavy wooden door. It swings open without resistance, and you're met by a room that feels more like a royal court than a church office. Rich tapestries, embroidered in deep red and gold. French oak furniture. A portrait of a pope, but something's off. The papal tiara looks slightly crooked, or maybe it's just the smile. Too polished, too practiced. Welcome to Avignon. In 1309, the papacy relocated from Rome to this small city in southern France. It was meant to be temporary, a safe haven during political unrest, but like any good houseguest, it stayed. And stayed. For nearly 70 years. Avignon became the new seat of the papacy, and 7 successive popes, all French, reigned from there. The Vatican in Rome fell quiet, ivy crawling over its halls while its power echoed from a different land. Some called it exile, others called it strategic relocation. You walk slowly across the tiled floor of this imagined Avignon palace. It's warm here, rich with the scent of wine and roasted meats. The French cardinals dine well. Too well, perhaps. The clergy grow fat, the walls grow tall, and the whispers grow louder, because this papacy feels different. Less spiritual, more comfortable. Avignon's popes were known for their diplomatic skill, yes, but also for their lavish lifestyles. Gold plates, private chapels, a choir that sang only for one man. Critics called it the Babylonian captivity, as if the church itself had been taken prisoner by foreign influence and soft cushions. Then in 1377, Pope Gregory XI decides to move the papacy back to Rome. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe political pressure. Maybe he just missed the smell of Italian olives. But it didn't go smoothly. Because when Gregory dies, shortly after returning to Rome, the cardinals panic. Rome is boiling with tension. The crowd demands an Italian pope. The French cardinals oblige nervously. They elect Urban VI Italian. Firm? Reformer? Too firm? Urban VI quickly offends nearly everyone around him. He criticizes the cardinals, threatens reforms, and, worst of all, refuses to be managed. The French faction rebels. They declare Urban's election invalid, claiming it was done under mob pressure, so naturally they elect their own pope, Clement VII. In Avignon, just like that, the church has 2 popes, 2 men, each claiming to be the true successor of Peter, each excommunicating the other, each gathering support from different European powers. France backs Avignon. England backs Rome. Spain flips back and forth like a theological seesaw. You sit quietly on a carved bench in the corner of this great hall, listening to the echoes of papal proclamations shouted across continents. Imagine being a parish priest in 1380. You wake up, you ask yourself, which pope am I following today? The one in Rome who says my bishop is valid? Or the one in Avignon who says he's not? The faithful are caught in the middle. Pilgrims hesitate. Bishops argue, kings maneuver. It's less about holiness now and more about strategy. And the punchline? Neither pope resigns. So in 1409, a council is held in Pisa to solve the problem. The church gathers. They declare both reigning popes illegitimate and elect a third. A third. Now you have 3 popes. The hall you're sitting in seems to sigh. The candles flicker nervously. Even the marble saints carved into the walls seem to look away. The chaos isn't just laughable, it's dangerous. The authority of the church begins to wobble like a stool with too many legs. The faithful lose confidence. The prestige of the papacy dims. This was meant to be the rock upon which the church was built. And now it's cracked, fractured by politics and pride. Historians still argue about who was right. Was Urban VI truly elected under duress? Was the Avignon papacy ever valid? Were any of the anti-popes acting in good faith? You lean your head back against the stone wall and wonder how something so divine could become so dizzying. But here's a softer moment. During this schism, in quiet villages across Europe, many common folk just kept praying. They didn't know which pope to follow. So they followed the rhythms of faith, lit candles, sang hymns, tried to live kindly, because sometimes the people closest to God are the ones farthest from power. Eventually, in 1417, the Council of Constance manages to resolve the schism. They depose or accept the resignations of all three current claimants and elect Martin V. Unity restored, sort of. You rise from the bench and pass beneath a fresco showing three men in white robes arguing over a single golden key. None of them see the small figure of Christ in the corner, quietly watching. You step back into the corridor, the echoes of shouting popes fading behind you. Ahead, something more sinister stirs. Not the confusion of too many popes, but the cool, calculating mind of one man. A pope who treats the throne like a chessboard. And poison like a backup plan. You'll meet him next, but for now let the silence close around you. Let the absurdity of three popes settle like dust. You've just wandered through a time when salvation depended on geography, and where the holiest city sometimes felt furthest from grace. Section 7, the corridor ahead smells different. Heavier, spiced, perfumed, and oddly sweet, like incense masking something that's already rotting beneath the gold. You're about to step into the private world of a family so infamous that their name alone became shorthand for ambition, manipulation, and whispered death. Welcome to the age of Pope Alexander VI, and welcome to the Borgias. The walls here don't whisper. They scheme. You can feel it. The press of secrets behind velvet drapes, the echo of footsteps walking not toward prayer but toward power. It's Rome in the late 1400s, and the papacy isn't just a spiritual office. It's a dynasty, a throne worth killing for, worth buying, bribing, even seducing your way into. Rodrigo Borgia was elected Pope in 1492. Yes, the same year Columbus set sail. The world was shifting, expanding, and the Vatican, it became a palace of indulgence and politics. Rodrigo didn't just accept that reality, he shaped it. You step into a tall, candlelit room. The walls are crimson. A tapestry of Alexander VI stares down at you, his eyes impossibly alive. A thick gold chain hangs around his neck. This isn't the look of a humble shepherd. This is a man who dined like a king and played the game better than any of his rivals. And he had rivals. Plenty of them. Alexander had many children, yes, children. Despite clerical celibacy being official church policy, Rodrigo Borgia fathered several, most famously Cesare and Lucrezia. He didn't hide them. He promoted them, lavished them with power, lands, and influence. Cesare became a cardinal in his teens. Lucrezia, well, her story is a whole labyrinth of its own. You move quietly past a velvet screen, where once court intrigue whispered in every corner. Alexander used marriage alliances like chess pieces, marrying Lucrezia off again and again to secure political favour. There were rumours, unsavoury ones, of incest, of poison, of night gatherings cloaked in incense and song. History can't quite confirm those tales, but it never could shake them off either. Even the paintings seem to lean away from you slightly. But perhaps the most damning thing about Alexander VI wasn't the rumour. It was the visible, tangible decay of the church's spiritual reputation under his reign. He openly sold church offices. Need a bishopric? Bring coin? Want to be a cardinal? Let's negotiate. Simony, the buying and selling of sacred things, became as common as confessions. It wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalized. Still, he was clever, calculated, he navigated political storms with practiced ease. War, alliance, betrayal, it was all a script to him, and at the centre of it all sat the papacy, cloaked in splendour, running on coin and charisma. Here's your strange tidbit for the night. Some scholars say Alexander VI once hosted a banquet of chestnuts at the Vatican. The story goes that naked dancers performed around scattered chestnuts on the floor while high-ranking church officials judged their enthusiasm. Whether this is myth or history, no one knows for sure, but the fact it feels believable says enough about the papacy at the time. You walk slowly past a painted map of Italy, tiny flags marking territories won and lost by Borgia maneuvering. Every inch of land, every shifting border seemed to ripple with the influence of Alexander's will. Rome wasn't so much a city of saints as it was a court of carefully arranged sins. And yet, despite it all, he wasn't stupid. He understood diplomacy. He negotiated with France, Spain, and Naples. He knew how to shift alliances like dominoes and make rivals bow. The church grew richer during his reign. Cathedrals expanded. Art blossomed under papal patronage, but beneath the brushstrokes, something darker pulsed. Power had replaced piety. Faith became a tool, a currency. You reach a small room off to the side. It's quieter here, dimmer. A single stone slab rests at the center, an imagined tomb. Alexander VI died in 1503. Suddenly, many say. He and his son Cesare reportedly fell ill after a banquet. Some believed he was poisoned, perhaps by accident, perhaps not. Irony maybe if true. Poison was, after all, the favoured tool of the Borgias. He was buried hastily. Without much ceremony, the Roman mob wasn't mourning. They ransacked his residence instead. By the time his body was laid to rest, it had already begun to decay, his features bloated, his skin blackened. It wasn't a peaceful death, it wasn't a peaceful legacy, and yet centuries later the Borgia name still lingers, etched in every tale of corruption, every fictional villain inspired by reality, every gold-plated throne that wobbles a little too much under its occupant. You step back into the hallway, and for a moment, the perfume of that age clings to you. It smells like rosewater and dust, like spilled wine and old secrets. Historians still argue whether Alexander VI was the most corrupt pope in history, or simply the most visible. His reign was too colourful, too dramatic to ignore, and in some strange way almost operatic. He wasn't the first bad pope, but he was the most cinematic. If the previous popes ruled badly, Alexander ruled beautifully badly. You pass a fresco of Lucrezia, her face too symmetrical to trust. Some called her a pawn, others a poisoner. She likely was neither, or both. That's the trouble with the Borgias. Truth slips through your fingers, the corridor ahead grows darker, the candlelight thins. You sense armour, iron, dust on leather. The next pope doesn't throw parties, he throws armies into cities and calls it faith, but that's tomorrow's worry. Tonight you've walked through rooms thick with the scent of power and perfume. You've seen what happens when a family treats the church like an inheritance. You've seen the holy city turn into a chessboard, where kings and cardinals both check their morals at the door. And now you pause. Let the walls breathe with you. Let the silence settle in your chest. You've just spent an evening with Pope Alexander VI, and the night isn't finished yet. Section 8. The air grows heavier with iron now. Gone are the tapestries and perfumed chambers. Gone is the velvet laughter of scandal. In their place, stone, steel, and the steady echo of marching boots. You step into a world where the Pope wears armour, not metaphorically, not ceremonially, but literally, sword on his hip, banner in hand. This is Julius II. They called him the warrior Pope. You walk through a cold stone hall that feels more fortress than chapel. Narrow windows slit the walls like defensive eyes. The scent of oil and rust clings to the air. Your feet fall softly on old flagstones worn down not by pilgrims, but by soldiers. Elected in 1503, yes, the same year the infamous Borgia died, Julius II was seen by some as a course correction, a strong hand to steady the helm after years of nepotism and poison. But steady didn't mean spiritual. Julius was a fighter, and not just in words, he led troops into battle. Pope Julius II, born Giuliano della Rovere, was no stranger to conflict. He'd been a cardinal for years, manoeuvring through the chaos of previous papacies, waiting, watching. He knew Rome like a chessboard. And when his moment came, he didn't hesitate. You pass beneath a fresco, this one different from the others. No halos. No soft lambs, just Julius astride a white horse, charging forward with a grim scowl and a papal flag flapping behind him. It looks more like a crusader king than a pontiff. And that's not far from the truth. He wore armor in battle, led troops personally to reclaim papal territories, and once stood under cannon fire during the siege of Mirandola. That's not poetic license. That actually happened. Imagine a pope, boots in the mud, smoke in the air, ordering his men to breach a city wall. The Vatican became a war room. Maps, alliances, mercenaries, enemies, France, Venice. The Holy Roman Empire. Everyone had a piece of Italy, and Julius wanted it back, all of it. But even warriors need symbols, so amid the warfare Julius commissioned something else, something you've likely seen, even if you've never stepped foot in Rome. The Sistine Chapel ceiling. Yes, that ceiling. It was Julius who summoned Michelangelo and told him to paint the sky inside a chapel. At first, Michelangelo resisted. He was a sculptor, not a painter, but Julius insisted. Demanded, threatened even, and eventually the artist gave in. You sit beneath the imagined ceiling now, eyes lifted. You can't see it, of course, but you feel it. The weight of genius, of tension between creator and commissioner. Julius wanted glory, Michelangelo wanted freedom. Their battles were just as fierce as any fought with swords. The ceiling was completed in 1512, 9 panels from the creation to the fall. It stretched over the heads of cardinals, a reminder that heaven watches even as men squabble below. Still, Julius's focus remained on the ground. He formed the Holy League, a coalition to push the French out of Italy. He saw himself as a unifier of Christendom, but his methods were blunt, often bloody. Diplomacy was fine, but if it failed, he sent soldiers or marched with them. You pass a long corridor lined with armor displays. One bears the insignia of the papal army. Imagine that, a pope with an army, not just in theory, but in practice. Some said he was possessed by Mars more than Christ. But he had admirers too. Even critics admitted he was bold, resolute, and fiercely intelligent. He expanded the Vatican Library, funded art, sculpture, architecture. Rome under Julius wasn't just a battlefield, it was a construction site. Here's your odd fact for tonight. Julius hated beards. He was the last pope to insist that clergy remain clean-shaven. His successors reversed that rule, but for a while the papal court was a haven of razor discipline. Julius also had a famously short temper. One story goes that when a bishop displeased him, he hit the man with his cane. More than once, papal authority, it seems, came with splinters. You drift toward a heavy oak door. Behind it lies his deathbed, though it's empty now. Julius died in 1513, not long after the Sistine ceiling was unveiled. He saw it, briefly, and then he was gone. His legacy is complicated. A pope who fought wars, who expanded the papal states, who brought Michelangelo to paint God and Adam into the heavens, who built, who battled, who never bowed. Historians still argue whether he was a hero or a tyrant. Some call him the last truly independent pope. Others see him as the final echo of the medieval papacy, before the coming storms of Reformation and fracture. You step back into the corridor. The air behind you still smells of gunpowder and oil. The clink of armor fades. Up ahead, a softer sound beckons. Music, laughter, the clink of silver on porcelain. The next pope didn't ride into battle. He threw feasts that made emperors envious. But that's for next time. Tonight, let your mind rest on the image of a white-haired man in golden armor, standing beneath a stormy sky, eyes fixed on a city he meant to reclaim, not for himself, but for the soul of Rome. You've just walked with Julius II. And the footsteps still echo behind you. Section 9. The scent changes again as you move forward, fainter now, almost floral, laced with the sweetness of wine and the distant brush of lute strings. No more armor. No more shouting in Latin or clashing swords in the name of heaven. The next door opens to a softer kind of decadence, but no less dangerous. Welcome to the age of Leo the Scent. You step into a grand hall bathed in golden afternoon light. Frescoes stretch from floor to ceiling. Cherubs peer down from gilded cornices. Tapestries ripple gently in the breeze coming through an open balcony. You walk past a polished table set with silver goblets, half full with forgotten wine. This is not the home of a warrior. It's the home of a Medici. Pope Leo X was born Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici. Yes, of those Medicis, the powerful Florentine banking family that basically printed Italian politics. He was elected pope in 1513, just after Julius II's death, and brought with him not the grit of a general, but the taste of a patron. Under Leo, the papacy became something between a bank, a theatre, and a salon for the finest minds and most expensive habits in Europe. You pause before a mirror framed in ivory. The reflection is soft, silks, rings, a red velvet cap. Leo wasn't slim, he wasn't stern, he smiled often. A gentle, almost sleepy smile, as if he knew the world was chaotic but still found it charming. He loved books, poetry, banquets, masks, animals too. His menagerie reportedly included a white elephant named Hanno, gifted by the King of Portugal. Hanno became a papal celebrity, paraded through Rome and even blessed by Leo himself. But beneath the perfumed surface, something was cracking. The church was bleeding money. You move through the next chamber, a treasury, emptied, scrolls listing donations, expenses, debts. Leodex spent lavishly, on art, on architecture, on celebrations that turned Rome into a permanent carnival. Michelangelo, Raphael, and Bramante thrived under his patronage. The Vatican grew glorious, but broke. He once said, perhaps joking, perhaps not, "Let us enjoy the papacy, since God has given it to us." A curious phrase for a man whose reign coincided with the biggest fracture in the church's history. Because while Leo poured gold into marble and music, a monk in Germany nailed 95 concerns to a church door, Martin Luther, and with each nail the ground beneath the church trembled. At the heart of it, indulgences. You approach a smaller side room, simple, lined with parchment scrolls. These were the tools of salvation for sale. The faithful were told they could reduce their time in purgatory, or that of a loved one, by purchasing indulgences, coins for mercy. Leo didn't invent the system, but he certainly used it. Why? To build St. Peter's Basilica, a cathedral meant to rival heaven, but to fund it, the Vatican needed coin. Enter Johann Tetzel, a fiery preacher who pushed indulgences with such flair, he coined the phrase, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." The people listened, they paid, but Luther didn't. He rebelled. You walk through an imagined crowd of 1517 Wittenberg, a young monk with intense eyes, parchment in hand. His protest wasn't just against Leo, it was against a church that had, in his eyes, traded grace for gold. Leo responded, slowly, then fiercely. He excommunicated Luther, called him a heretic. But the match had already been struck. The Reformation spread like wildfire across Europe, and Leo, for all his elegance, seemed unready for the blaze. Here's your strange fact of the night. When Leo received Luther's 95 Theses, he reportedly dismissed them as a monk's squabble, like a fly buzzing too close to his wine. History, as it turned out, disagreed. You pause beside a window that overlooks the imagined courtyard. A fountain trickles softly. In the distance, a feast is being prepared. Boar, venison, sugared fruits arranged like sculptures. Musicians tune their lutes. Somewhere, a boy in papal robes toasts the sky. Leo died in 1521, deeply in debt. He left the papal coffers nearly empty. His successor had to pawn papal jewels to cover the bills. And yet, some still remember him fondly, as a lover of art, a protector of culture. A man who, perhaps, saw the papacy less as a burden and more as a stage for beauty. Historians still argue whether Leo X caused the Reformation through greed, blindness, or simply by failing to grasp the storm building at the edges of Rome. You continue down the corridor, the velvet carpet muffling your steps. Behind you, the fragrance of wine and oil paint fades. Ahead, the shadows grow colder. The next pope waits in silence. He will be no artist, no poet. He will bring suspicion, chains, and whispered torture. But for now, rest in the echo of a man who lived as if holiness could be dressed in silk and sung by choirs. You've just walked with Pope Leo X, and the music is still playing, faint, fragile, almost a lullaby. Section 10. The music is gone now, not faded, cut, like a lute string snapped mid-chord. You step from velvet halls into something colder. The corridor narrows, the walls are bare. Torches sputter instead of flickering, and the silence isn't gentle anymore, it listens. The next pope doesn't laugh, feast, or ride into battle. He watches. You've reached the era of Pope Urban VI, and if the last few popes were remembered for indulgence, Urban is remembered for fury. Born Bartolomeo Prignano, Urban was elected in 1378 during one of the most chaotic transitions in papal history. You remember it. Rome had just wrested back control from the Avignon line. The people demanded an Italian pope, and Urban was their answer. He wasn't part of the usual noble families. He didn't dine in silk or sip imported wine. He was austere, disciplined. A reformer, they thought, but the reform didn't stop at indulgences or spending habits. It ran deeper, too deep. Urban VI demanded obedience, absolute, immediate. And when it didn't come, he didn't argue. He punished. You move through a corridor that smells faintly of wax and old rope. The stones under your feet are smooth, but there's something tense in the air, the kind of stillness that builds before a storm. Urban's court turned inward. Suspicion grew. He accused cardinals of plotting against him. Some of them probably were. Papal politics was rarely innocent, but Urban didn't wait for proof. He acted. You pause before a small chamber, low-ceilinged and dim. There are no windows here. Just a simple wooden table, an imagined set of chains, quiet on the floor. This was where his enemies were brought, not to debate, but to confess. Sometimes with words, sometimes with screams. In 1385, Urban arrested several of his own cardinals, accusing them of conspiracy. He imprisoned them in the Castel Sant'Angelo, Rome's looming fortress, and tortured them. One cardinal reportedly died after having his skin slowly peeled away. Another went mad. A third was found dead in his cell, his mouth stuffed with rags. Historians still argue whether Urban gave the direct order. Some say he merely allowed it. Others insist he was present for the worst of it. Either way, the Church had rarely seen a pope so consumed by paranoia, and yet he kept preaching. From the pulpit, Urban thundered against corruption. He demanded reforms from bishops, criticized priests for laziness, and declared that the Church must be purified. In principle, he wasn't wrong. But his methods, those were another matter. You pass a statue now. Urban's face carved in stone, mouth open mid-sermon, eyes carved too wide. It's not a comforting expression. He looks like a man trying to scare God into listening. Here's your strange moment for the night. Urban VI had such a temper that even the clergy were afraid to speak in his presence. One anecdote says he would berate bishops until they wept, then mock them for being weak. You imagine a cardinal clutching his robes, trying to disappear into the floor while Urban's voice rose like thunder through the marble halls. And despite it all, despite the cruelty, he refused to resign. Remember Clement VII, the rival pope elected in Avignon after Urban's coronation? That was the beginning of the Great Western Schism. 2 popes, 2 courts, 1 church divided again. Urban had his supporters, mostly in Italy, England, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire, but others backed Clement. Europe was once again split down the altar. And the faithful caught in the middle, again. So here we are, a pope who preaches reform with fire, who tortures cardinals while demanding discipline, who prays in Latin and punishes in silence. Urban died in 1389, alone and largely unloved. No great crowds mourned him. His legacy, a darker page in papal history, a reminder that even good intentions left unchecked can twist into cruelty. You step quietly from the chamber. The air feels fresher outside. You breathe it in, letting the torchlight stretch your shadow back down the hall. The Church did survive him, it always did, but it didn't come away unscarred. Historians today still debate how much of Urban's paranoia was born from real threats, and how much was the result of isolation, stress, or even madness. Some say he believed deeply in his mission, that the ends justified the means. Others say he simply liked control. You pause again, letting your hand trail across a stone wall pockmarked by time. There's a lesson here, but this isn't a sermon. The papacy wasn't always grandeur and gold. Sometimes it was a man in a dark room, certain that everyone was lying to him, certain that only he could save the Church from itself. And now the hallway turns again. The next room smells of perfume, of old money, of silk cushions and inherited power. You're about to walk into the age of papal families, of sons disguised as nephews, of Rome as a family business, but that's for the next step. For now, let the weight of silence settle gently around you. You've just stood with Urban 6, and the room behind you still listens. Section 11, the corridor shifts again. Wider now, and softer underfoot. The torches give way to oil lamps, and the flicker of flame dances across satin-lined walls. You're walking into a different kind of power, one cloaked not in sermons or swords, but in smiles, veils, and whispers behind closed doors. Welcome to the pornocracy. Yes, that's what historians came to call this era, also known, more delicately, as the rule of the harlots. You don't need to brace yourself for anything explicit, but you do need to understand. For a time, the Vatican was not ruled by popes alone, but by the women who controlled them. You're here to meet Pope Sergius III, but he's not alone, not really. Standing beside him, figuratively, and perhaps more literally than some would like to admit, is Theodora, and more notably, her daughter, Marozia. Two Roman noblewomen, brilliant, ambitious, and very much in charge. It's the early 10th century, a time when Rome was more chaos than order. The papacy, weakened and tossed like a coin from faction to faction, became a prize for powerful families. Sergius III, who reigned from 904 to 911, wasn't chosen for piety. He was installed by force after murdering his predecessor. He had been excommunicated years earlier and returned to the papacy through violence. You step into a high-ceilinged room. It's quiet now, but you can almost hear the arguments, deep voices, softer ones cutting through like knives. Marozia's presence lingers. She was said to be Sergius's lover, though details are hazy. Together, they were rumoured to have had a son. That boy, he would later become Pope John XI. Yes, a pope, possibly fathered by a pope. You shake your head, lips curling at the absurdity. Even the tapestries on the wall seem unsure how to depict that. It was Marozia, not Sergius, who truly pulled the strings. After his death, she continued to dominate papal appointments, elevating family members to bishoprics, cardinals, even the Holy See itself. For decades, she maneuvered through Vatican corridors like a queen in a chess game where every move left another man enthroned, or dead. You pass a bust of Marozia now, delicate features carved in white marble, lips pursed ever so slightly. She doesn't look cruel, she looks certain. Historians still argue how much of this is truth and how much has been twisted through time. Was Marozia a power-hungry manipulator, or simply a savvy noblewoman making use of a broken system? Either way, the facts are grim. During this period, popes were bought, coerced, seduced, or strangled, sometimes all four. Want a strange detail? Pope John XII, the very same wild pope you met earlier, was her descendant, which means the worst popes didn't just spring up randomly, sometimes they were born into it. You move past a small writing desk, on it an imagined letter from Sergius, maybe to Marozia. Maybe to no one. The ink is dark, the Latin sharp, the message unreadable. It doesn't matter. Words meant little during this time. Influence spoke louder. And Marozia spoke in titles, in appointments, in marriage contracts, and whispered threats. Eventually, power turned on her, as it tends to do. Her own son, Alberic II, had her imprisoned. She died in confinement, her power gone, her legend sealed. But the papacy she helped shape, one of bloodlines and favours, of family before faith, that legacy lingered long after the doors of her cell closed. You step back into the corridor. The scent here is different than earlier halls. No blood, no incense. It smells like dried roses, expensive parchment, and the faint hint of old perfume, the kind nobles wore, not priests. The term pornocracy wasn't coined until centuries later, and while it sounds like a scandalous exaggeration, it captured something very real. The uncomfortable fact that for decades the spiritual centre of Christianity was effectively ruled by a family, and the popes, at best, willing participants, at worst, pawns. You pause beside a window. Through it, Rome sprawls below, imagined but alive. The river winds lazily through stone bridges, church bells ring in the distance, but their meaning feels muted. Hollow, as though each clang is asking, who's really in charge? Historians today still debate how much agency Sergius III actually had. Was he just a figurehead? Did he believe in reform, or was he, like so many others, simply swept up in a storm of ambition stronger than his convictions? You press your palm to the wall. It's warm here, too warm, like secrets still simmer beneath the surface. Ahead, the corridor changes again. The next room holds a pope with the Sistine name, a patron of art. A master of favour. a man who turned nepotism into architecture, but that's one step ahead. For now, let the silence take hold. Let Morosia's shadow stretch behind you, long and quiet. You've just walked through the darkest corridors of papal history, the ones where titles were inherited like jewelry and holiness bowed to family strategy. And still, the candles keep burning. Section 12. You walk onward, and the corridor takes on a golden glow. Not the soft, flickering light of quiet devotion, but something grander, shinier, almost theatrical. You can feel it in the marble beneath your steps, the way it gleams as if polished not for use but for display. You've entered a Vatican where the family name matters more than the cross above the altar. It's time to meet the Medici popes. The name Medici echoes like wealth itself, Florence's power family, patrons of art, architecture and politics, and they didn't stop at city halls or counting houses. No, they reached higher, into the papacy, and made it theirs. 2 Medici men would wear the papal tiara, Leo X, whom you've already met, and later Clement VII. But their influence didn't end with them, because more important than titles were the family networks they built, webs of nephews, cousins, godsons, and allies who would quietly shape the church from within. You arrive in a room lined with portraits, none marked Pope, but you recognize the eyes. Nephews in red robes, cardinals by 20, bishops by family favour. This was nepotism with marble trim. Sixtus IV, though not a Medici himself, perfected this strategy before them. Born Francesco della Rovere, elected pope in 1471, he set the standard for turning blood ties into policy. You might know him for commissioning the Sistine Chapel, but behind that beauty was a web of alliances stitched together with surnames. You pause before an imagined ledger. It doesn't list prayers or indulgences. It lists names, appointments, promotions. These weren't earned in prayerful silence. They were arranged over dinners, traded like dowries. Positions in the church became favours, and those favours became power. Sixtus IV appointed 6 of his nephews as cardinals. One of them was Giuliano della Rovere, the future Julius II, the warrior pope you walked beside not long ago. See how the threads connect? One of the strangest facts from this time is that popes began referring to their illegitimate sons as nephews. It became code. A quiet nod to the reality behind the robe. The Latin term nepos, meaning grandson or nephew, gave rise to our word nepotism, and nowhere was that term more alive than here, within these walls. You move into a hall of tall windows, sunlight slanting in like a spotlight. This isn't a space for monks, it's for diplomats. Courtiers, gentlemen in lace cuffs discussing faith over wine while scribes wait with scrolls already half signed. Under the Medici popes, the church became a stage, and Rome its glittering set. Leo X, you recall, hosted elaborate theatrical performances in the Vatican gardens. The gardens themselves were redesigned to impress foreign ambassadors, flowers arranged by colour and symbolism, fountains that sang, peacocks that strutted like royalty. Clement VII, cousin to Leo, took the throne in 1523. His reign was darker, riddled with conflict and disaster. He tried to play the political game like his relatives had, but the world was changing too fast. The Reformation was spreading, power was slipping. And then came the sack of Rome. In 1527, troops loyal to the Holy Roman Emperor stormed the city. Rome was ravaged, churches desecrated, citizens slaughtered, the streets running with blood and ash. Clement VII, Pope and Medici, fled into hiding. He took refuge in the Castel Sant'Angelo, where he watched his city burn from behind thick walls. You stop before a window that faces west. Imagined smoke curls in the air. You think of Clement watching from that high tower, his city falling to pieces while the world he tried to charm turned its back. Historians still argue whether the Medici popes strengthened the church through culture or weakened it through indulgence. They brought beauty, yes, financed Raphael and Michelangelo, rebuilt Rome into a city of marvels, but they also tied the papacy to family greed, to dynastic games that would come undone when challenged. Want a curious fact to hold on to? Leo X once declared, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." You've heard that line before, but now as you stand beneath a painted ceiling featuring flying cherubs and smug saints, the phrase hits harder, because the Medici did enjoy it. They dressed it, painted it, gilded it, and filled it with cousins. You move through another doorway and find yourself in a quiet chapel, a rare space untouched by wealth, just bare stone, a single cross, and silence. a whisper of what the papacy once was, and perhaps what it was meant to be. You sit on a wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by time. Let your breath slow, let your thoughts soften. The Medici are gone now, but their fingerprints remain, on the walls, on the altars, in the art, and in the unspoken rule that family means everything. You've walked through a Vatican reshaped by bloodlines, where the shepherds of faith wore rings too heavy with inheritance, where power came not from heaven, but from Florence. Ahead lies another chamber, and another pope, but for now, sit with this. The nephews are quiet now, but they're still watching. Section 14. The corridor turns quieter, narrower, as if the very walls know what's coming. The lamps here don't flicker, they stare. You walk slower now. This pope doesn't stride with a sword or hide behind scholars. He wears his sins like a second robe, embroidered not with crosses but with names, of children, of lovers, of cardinals who owe him everything. You're walking into the reign of Pope Innocent VIII. The irony of his name doesn't escape you. He ruled from 1484 to 1492, a brief span, but long enough to leave a mark, like a wine stain on white linen. He wasn't a builder like Sixtus IV, nor a warrior like Julius. He wasn't ambitious in vision. He was ambitious in lineage. You pause in a vaulted room filled with imagined portraits, none of saints. These are children. Boys and girls, Innocent fathered at least 8. He acknowledged them openly. Provided for them, celebrated them. He even arranged marriages, built dowries, gave his sons titles and power within the church. The title Father of Rome had never felt so literal. You move past a gilded cradle, a symbol, a reminder. The man who should have led souls to heaven was busy securing his bloodline on earth. One of his sons, Franceschetto Cybo, received lands and offices, not because of merit but because of blood. The papal court shifted to accommodate not the will of God, but the will of the Cybo family. Strangest fact, Innocent VIII didn't bother with euphemisms. These weren't nephews, they were figly, sons. The Vatican, under Innocent, became a nursery of politics, built less on faith and more on favour. You turn down a quieter passage, one that leads to another part of his legacy, the sale of indulgences, not new, but under Innocent, industrialised. To fund his lavish court and the wars of his allies, he expanded the sale of forgiveness, not just to the rich, but to everyone. The poor scraped coins together, desperate for relief from purgatory. The message was clear, your soul had a price tag. It was under Innocent's watch that the idea of indulgences as commerce truly solidified, paving the way for the protests that would shake the church a generation later. Luther's hammer hadn't yet struck the Wittenberg door, but you can feel the tension building here, in the quiet desperation of a mother buying time for her dead son's soul. You sit for a moment beneath a painted ceiling, one that features not cherubs or saints, but coats of arms. Family crests, marital alliances, the spiritual took a back seat. The political rode shotgun, and then there was the blood. Innocent gave full support to the Spanish Inquisition, issued bulls authorizing mass conversions of Jews and Muslims under the Spanish crown. These weren't gentle invitations to faith, they were ultimatums: convert or leave. Convert or die. Thousands were expelled, thousands more burned. You press your fingers against the stone. It's cold, but you swear you can feel the heat of those pyres far away, flickering through time. And then there's the tale of the transfusion. It's said that as Innocent lay dying, doctors tried something desperate, an early form of blood transfusion. They brought in 3 young boys, gave them coins to donate their blood. All 3 boys died, so did Innocent. Historians debate whether the story is true. Some say it's legend, others say it's recorded in early medical journals, but either way, the image lingers, a dying pope clinging to life with another's blood. It feels symbolic, too neat, too tragic. Maybe that's why it stuck. You rise and walk on. Innocent VIII died in 1492, the same year Columbus set sail. The world was opening, expanding, but within the Vatican walls the focus stayed narrow. Family gold, power. The church, intended as a refuge for the eternal, had become a fortress for the temporal. You pass a doorway bearing the Cybo crest. You don't enter. You don't need to. The story is already written, a pope with a dozen priorities, but salvation wasn't one of them. And yet the people still prayed, still lit candles, still knelt beneath saints who never asked for gold in return. You wonder how they saw their pope, if they did at all. Was he just a name, a face on a coin? Or did they know? Could they sense the rot beneath the robe? Historians today view Innocent VIII as a prelude. A warning he wasn't the loudest or the most violent, but in his quiet, smiling way he embodied everything that would one day fracture the church. And now you step into a narrow hall that smells of dust and parchment. Ahead lies a door. Heavy, locked from the inside. It's not a throne room. It's a vault, because the next chapter isn't about people, it's about paper. About secrets, but not yet. For now, let the silence settle. You've just walked with Pope Innocent VIII, and the cradle behind you still rocks. Section 15. You step away from the corridors of bloodlines and into something quieter, but not calmer. The silence here feels denser, like it's layered in dust. The lamps are fewer, their light softer, dimmer. Ahead, a tall arched doorway waits with no ornament. No crest, no gold leaf, just a simple Latin inscription overhead. Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum. The Vatican's secret archives. You've arrived at the threshold of the Church's deepest vaults. This isn't where Mass is held. It's where memory sleeps. Inside, the air is still. The temperature is carefully kept just above cold, as if even the parchment deserves preservation. You walk between shelves that stretch upward like forest trees, each one lined with boxes, scrolls, ledgers, millions of pages. Stories folded and locked away, sometimes for centuries. This is where the Church keeps its secret. It's not all sinister. Some of the records are just old letters, tax receipts, lists of bishops long forgotten, but others are different. Here lies the correspondence of excommunicated kings, the trial records of Galileo, the confessions of heretics written by shaky hands, the bulls that launched crusades, the orders that silenced rebels, and, somewhere, buried in the sealed chambers, are the papal documents tied to the worst scandals in church history. You walk slowly past a massive cabinet. One drawer is labelled with a faded tag, Formosus Synodus Horrenda. You remember him, the dead pope tried in court. Here lies the record of that trial, the official transcript of a man propped on a throne, accused by those still breathing. The very idea that such a record exists makes your skin prickle. A few steps later, another shelf catches your eye. On it, notes from the time of the Avignon papacy, letters back and forth between Rome and France. Excommunications written in elegant Latin, signed with seals so heavy you can imagine the wax still soft. Then you come to a sealed chamber. It's behind an iron gate, bolted, rusted just slightly at the hinges. No key, no invitation. This is where the true secrets rest. Documents still withheld from public view, thousands of them. Theories swirl, proof of forgotten popes, hidden scandals, letters that could fracture faith if read aloud. Historians today are allowed access, but carefully. They request specific documents, wait weeks for approval, and are supervised closely. Not all areas are open. Some never will be. You lean in, peer through the bars, and wonder what lies just beyond the reach of curiosity. Here's a strange fact. During the Nazi occupation of Rome in World War II, Pope Pius XII ordered that many Jews be sheltered in Vatican properties. Whether he did enough, or did so soon enough, remains one of the great controversies of modern church history, and much of the relevant documentation, it sat here. In this archive, unseen for decades, only recently have scholars begun to access those wartime files. And even then, many pages remain redacted, misfiled, or sealed indefinitely. You press your palm to the iron gate, cold, solid. Time itself seems frozen behind it, and the silence isn't just respectful. It's protective. You move on, deeper into the vaults. There's a letter in the next chamber, from King Henry VIII, begging for annulment. The Pope said no. England broke away. History turned on a paragraph. In another file, Galileo's signed confession, forced to recant under threat of torture, he muttered, and yet it moves, as he left. The world didn't stop spinning, but the church pretended it could. The further you walk, the more surreal it becomes. Each cabinet holds a moment of decision, a page that changed belief, broke kingdoms or buried truths under ink and wax. There's no pope here. Not in flesh, but their fingerprints are everywhere, in the orders signed, the names erased, the indulgences priced, the faith sometimes defended and sometimes sold. This archive doesn't scream, it doesn't accuse, it waits patiently, because time in here moves differently. It doesn't forget. It just closes the drawer. You pause near the exit, where a single lantern hangs beside a final case. Inside, under thick glass, rests a small book, worn leather, its cover cracked. A papal diary, anonymous, undated. One line, faded but still legible. "We are not saints, we are stewards. May God forgive what we protect." You read it again. Then once more. You step back into the corridor, the air warmer now. Outside the archives, the church hums with life again. Tourists snapping photos, priests walking swiftly past fountains, candles lit at altars by people who will never know what lies behind the locked doors. But you know, or at least you've seen the edges. Historians still argue whether the church hides its past out of fear or reverence. Whether secrecy protects the sacred or shields the guilty. You don't answer, you just walk on. And ahead the corridor widens, not into splendor, not into shadow, but into the present. You've just walked through the Vatican secret archives, and the drawers haven't stopped whispering. Section 16. You step out of the archives into a corridor that feels brighter, but not warmer. The marble here glows too cleanly. The columns stand too straight. The silence has a different texture now, not ancient, not mystical, but polished. Curated, as though history, finally aware of its own gaze, has decided to look presentable. You've entered the Vatican of the modern age, but the sins you find have only changed clothes. Gone are the velvet shadows of poison and papal nephews. Gone are the Renaissance orgies, the open lovers, the sons disguised as nephews. Now the scandals come dressed in legalese, in press releases, in carefully rehearsed interviews. What once festered in private now glimmers on headlines. The old rot didn't vanish. It got better lighting. You walk into a wide atrium, sun pouring in through vast arched windows. Tourists murmur nearby. Cameras flash. Somewhere, a priest explains the origins of the Swiss Guard, his voice rehearsed, polite, safe. But beneath all that, something quieter still whispers, because the modern church has its own worst chapters. You're still walking through them. It begins, as it so often does, with silence. You pass an iron gate. Through it, a long hallway leads to the archives again, but not the old ones. These are the more recent files, the ones that matter today. Boxes stamped with years you remember: 1950, 1963, 1987, 2002, and on them names of parishes, dioceses, bishops, victims, the Catholic Church's global sexual abuse crisis. You don't need to relive the headlines, you know them, you've seen the documentaries. Read the lists. Still, walking past these boxes, imagined but far too real, feels like passing by a hospital ward where the wounds never closed and never will. For decades, centuries, some argue, cases were hidden. Priests moved from parish to parish, survivors silenced with settlements. Truth buried under theology, the children never forgot, but the church often tried to. And yet, it is here, in the midst of this painful truth, that you pause, not to excuse, but to understand. You enter a smaller room, less grand than the rest. Inside, 3 chairs and a long table. At one end sits a typewriter. At the other, a folder. You open it carefully. Inside is a letter from a bishop to Rome, dated 1979. The language is delicate, evasive, but the meaning is plain. There have been concerns. The letter asks for discretion. Requests reassignment, not investigation. This pattern wasn't rare. It was policy. Across continents, for decades, you take a breath. Close the folder, then walk. You pass a large portrait of Pope John Paul II. Beloved, charismatic, a spiritual giant for millions. Yet even he, they say, struggled to grasp the depth of what was unfolding. Some believe he trusted too much. Others say he protected those who didn't deserve it. The truth, as always, is messier than the myth. His successor, Pope Benedict XVI, inherited the storm. He was the first to truly acknowledge it publicly, first in whispers, then in press conferences, then in personal letters to survivors. And yet even Benedict, with all his theological rigour, stepped down. The weight of the papacy and its long-buried sins proved heavier than even he could carry. And then came Francis. You enter another chamber, modern, open, stark in design. A wooden cross hangs on a concrete wall. No gold. No marble, just plain walls, plain chairs. Here the mood shifts. Francis, the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit, the first to choose not a palace but a guest house. He spoke of mercy, of reform, of listening. And to his credit, he listened more than most. He met with survivors, opened new channels, made bishops resign. He asked repeatedly for the church to be honest about its failings, but he also disappointed, moved slowly, sometimes backpedaled. He condemned the abuse, but struggled to restructure the systems that allowed it. And so the questions remain: is he a reformer or just a better publicist? Historians still argue whether this era marks a turning point or just a rebranding. Some say the church is facing its shame at last. Others believe the shame is simply being better managed. You walk on, past stained glass windows depicting saints, not the usual ones. These are newer figures: Oscar Romero, Dorothy Day, the quiet rebels. The ones who loved the church enough to challenge it. And that, you realize, is the strange heart of it all. The worst popes in history were never just bad men. They were signs, warnings, embodiments of everything the church is vulnerable to: pride, secrecy, fear, and the seduction of unchecked power. And in every era, they remind us of what happens when faith becomes performance, when the throne becomes a shield. You exit into the main square now. The sunlight is strong, tourists take selfies, a nun hands out prayer cards. A child runs across the stone with a gelato, and above it all, the dome of St. Peter's looms like a question. You find a bench and sit, because here's the truth: the papacy has survived everything. Scandal, war, schism, corruption. And still, Mass is held. Bells ring, faith flickers. Not because popes were perfect, but because perhaps people keep hoping they'll be better. You sit with that for a long moment. The next section will return you to the past again, to the coin that bought forgiveness, to the indulgence that shattered unity. But for now, you've walked the Vatican of today, you've passed beneath the quiet eyes of history, and the light is still changing. Section 17. The corridor ahead is older now, worn. You can feel the past rising again like mist from cold stone. Gone are the polished walls of modern Rome. Now you're back beneath arches darkened by candle soot, where faith once met finance in ways few dared question out loud. You're walking toward a table piled high with indulgences. Coins, parchments, seals. 100 hands outstretched across centuries, offering money in exchange for mercy. This was the bargain that almost broke the church, and in many ways it still echoes. You stand beside the imagined wooden table. It's cluttered, handwritten slips of parchment promising salvation. Some grant remission of sins. Others shorten time in purgatory, for yourself, your parents, even unborn children, each one marked with the authority of a pope's seal, each one carrying a price. In the early centuries, indulgences were rare, earned through pilgrimages, acts of charity, self-denial, but over time the rules softened, then blurred, then crumbled. By the late Middle Ages, the sale of indulgences became routine. Under Pope Leo VI, the Medici prince you've already walked with, the system reached its golden apex. And it was all to fund one thing: the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, the greatest cathedral ever imagined. A monument of stone and glory, but monuments cost coin, so the church found its coin in your soul. You step into a bustling plaza. The year is 1517. A friar stands on a crate. His name is Johann Tetzel. His voice rings out across the market. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. The crowd gathers. People nod. Mothers clutch coins in trembling hands, thinking of lost children. Labourers hand over their week's wages, not to buy heaven, but to shave off years of fire for those already gone. You watch it unfold quietly. It's not greed that fills this scene, it's desperation, fear wrapped in hope. The church didn't invent that, but it knew how to sell to it. Tetzel's indulgences were printed by the hundreds, stamped with ecclesiastical approval. And his quota? Backed by Rome. His campaign was well-funded, widely publicized, and brutally effective. Until a monk decided it had gone too far. You shift your gaze now, across the imagined square, to a small figure near the edge. He's reading. Frowning, hammer in hand, Martin Luther. October 31st, 1517, Luther nails his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church. His arguments, academic, theological, but they strike a nerve, one that runs deep across Europe. You follow the sound of hammer on wood. It echoes through the corridor, through cathedrals, through royal courts. His questions were simple. Can you buy forgiveness? Can grace be priced? Is the Pope's authority stronger than the conscience of a man? Historians still argue whether Luther intended to start a revolution, but the spark was lit and the fire spread. You return now to the table. Fewer coins sit upon it. A draught rustles the parchment. The smell of ink and wax seems fainter. Something has shifted. The Reformation was not born of war or heresy or politics. It was born of doubt, a quiet voice saying, "This doesn't feel right." And that voice echoed across pulpits, across borders, across generations. But the church didn't fold overnight. Pope Leo X condemned Luther, excommunicated him, called him a wild boar tearing through the vineyard of Christ, and yet Leo's words couldn't stop the tide. Within decades, entire countries broke away from Rome, kings sided with reformers, bishops split. Protestantism rose, and indulgences, the little parchment slips that promised eternity, became symbols of everything the church had lost touch with. You walk past a burning barrel now. Inside, indulgences curl and blacken, a symbolic fire, but the ash smells like memory. And yet, the practice never quite disappeared. Even today, indulgences remain, granted under specific acts, prayers, visits to holy sites. The theology is refined. The abuse is condemned, but the word still lives. You glance at a wall inscription carved in Latin, "Ego te absolvo," I absolve you. That phrase is meant to heal, but here it feels heavier. What does it cost to be forgiven? What should it? You step into a quieter chapel, empty pews. A single lit candle. You sit, let the question hang. The worst popes didn't create the sale of indulgences, but many of them perfected it, weaponized it, funded cathedrals and campaigns with it, turned grace into a ledger entry, and yet the church survived. Not because of them, but in spite of them. You rise slowly. The table of indulgences fades behind you. The market is empty now. Tetzel is gone. So is Luther. Only the echoes remain. Up ahead, the corridor curves. One final scandal waits, a man whose reign pushed the church into crisis once again, not with money, not with armies, but with silence. But for now, walk gently. You've just stood at the table where salvation had a price, and the ink is still drying. Section 18. The corridor grows narrow again. Not because of space, but because of weight. You feel it settle on your shoulders the way dust settles on forgotten stone. This is not a place of noise. Not anymore. The footsteps you hear are not papal parades or crusading armies. They are hesitant. Careful, you're walking into the silence of Pope Pius XII. He reigned from 1939 to 1958, a period carved by war, genocide, reconstruction, and a church that often stood very still while the world burned around it. The room you enter now is dim, though electric lights glow softly overhead. The walls are smooth concrete, modern, but cold. There are no tapestries here, no paintings. Just shelves of paper, and in the center, a single desk, empty. This is where memory and silence met. Eugenio Pacelli, before becoming Pope, had served as Vatican Secretary of State. He was a diplomat first, a man of careful words, and that caution followed him into the papacy, especially during World War II. You walk past a series of imagined newspaper clippings. Some headline his calls for peace, others question his silence, because while the Holocaust swept through Europe, while Jews were rounded up in Italy itself, while trains rolled toward death camps, Pope Pius XII rarely spoke publicly against the Nazis by name. He offered general statements, pleas for peace, for humanity, for dignity, but he never said Hitler, never said Auschwitz, never said Jews. The question has haunted the church ever since. Historians still argue bitterly, was his silence diplomatic restraint or moral failure? Some say he worked quietly behind the scenes, instructing convents to hide refugees, urging bishops to help Jews in secret. Others say he failed the moment, that he had the global pulpit and chose to whisper. You pause beside a tall window. Imagine him there, watching the German troops march through Rome, knowing, feeling the weight of it all, and still choosing stillness. Inside the Vatican, thousands of Jews were sheltered. Churches across Italy opened their doors. Nuns forged baptism certificates. Secret instructions, some say, came from the top. But if they did, they were never spoken aloud, not in the way the world begged for. In 2020, the Vatican began opening the Pius XII archives, millions of documents long locked away. Scholars rushed in, some looking for evidence of secret heroism, others expecting confirmation of cowardice. They found both, and neither. A letter from a German priest warning the Pope in 1942 that thousands of Jews were being gassed. A note from a Vatican diplomat calling Nazi violence unbelievable. A series of memos debating whether to speak and what might be lost if they did. You take a seat now in the imagined papal office. There's no music, no incense, just the whisper of paper, the weight of withheld words. Pius XII's defenders say he feared Nazi retaliation, that an open condemnation might lead to more bloodshed, not less, that he had to protect the Church. Vatican neutrality was paramount, they said. The Pope could not risk being drawn into war, but critics ask, what is the point of neutrality when the innocent are burning? He was named righteous among the nations by some, condemned as Hitler's Pope by others, and the truth, messy, human, uncomfortable, lies somewhere in between. Here's your strange fact. In 1950, Pius XII declared the dogma of the Assumption of Mary, proclaiming that she had been taken body and soul into heaven. It was the first time in nearly a century that a pope had exercised papal infallibility. The world was rebuilding from ashes. And the Church chose to reach upward. You rise from the chair and move toward the next gallery. Here, a different legacy waits. After the war, Pius XII positioned the Church as a bulwark against communism. He endorsed Christian democratic parties, issued strong condemnations of Marxist atheism. He excommunicated communists and elevated anti-communist bishops. The Vatican became a Cold War player, quiet but not uninvolved, and yet his greatest critics remained the ghosts of the war. The deported, the gassed, the vanished. In 1943, more than 1,000 Jews were rounded up in Rome, sent to Auschwitz, from just outside the Vatican walls. And still no direct papal protest came, not that week, not that year. Not ever. You stop at a large glass case. Inside it, a white zucchetto, the small papal skullcap Pius wore. It's faded now, yellowed at the edge. Time has softened its corners. But the questions haven't softened. Was he waiting for the right moment, or was he simply afraid to be wrong? You continue down the hall. The silence deepens, not because of mystery, but because of memory, because silence, once chosen, cannot be undone. It echoes longer than speech, and when it fills a church, it changes what the walls remember. Historians still search for clarity. Some say he saved thousands, others say he failed millions. He was the vicar of Christ. But he was also a man, and perhaps in that tension lies the whole church itself. You reach a final doorway. Beyond it, the modern Vatican returns. Press conferences, reporters, papal tweets. The world has changed, but the silence of Pius XII remains, like incense still clinging to stone. You stop one last time. Let it be quiet, because some failures don't shout. They whisper, and they stay. You've just walked with Pope Pius XII, and the silence still listens. Section 19. The corridor widens now, but not with grandeur. Instead, it's filled with echoes. Apologies, denials, brief flashes of light through long tunnels of avoidance. You've stepped into the most recent chapter, a time when the Church still kneels, not before its own glory, but before the damage it finally admits it helped cause. This is the era of reckoning. You are now walking with Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, two very different men, caught in the same storm. You step into a modern conference hall. The air is climate-controlled. The marble is sleek, the chairs minimal. On the wall, a single crucifix. Beneath it, a microphone. Here, for the first time in centuries, a pope spoke openly to the world about abuse. Pope Benedict XVI, formerly Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, was elected in 2005 after the death of John Paul II. He was a theologian, not a politician. Quiet, cerebral, cautious. But by the time he took the throne of St. Peter, the sexual abuse crisis was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. You walk past an imagined wall of headlines: priest moved after accusations, church knew and did nothing, Vatican apologizes for decades of abuse. Benedict's face appears on television screens across the room, his voice calm but weary. In 2008, during a visit to the United States, he publicly acknowledged the shame the church felt. He met with survivors behind closed doors. He authorized investigations, defrocked some priests, ordered bishops to cooperate with civil authorities. But it was not enough. You pass into a room of case files, each folder an accusation, a childhood lost, a silence endured, a trust betrayed. Some files date back 50 years. Others were filed last week. Benedict tried to face them, but his own past caught up with him. As Archbishop of Munich in the 1970s, he had knowledge of abuse cases. Documents surfaced, defences were made, clarifications issued, and in 2013, after just 8 years as Pope, he stepped down, the first in almost 600 years. Historians still debate why: age, health, scandal, or simply the weight of knowing too much. You sit on a bench beneath a plain portrait. His eyes are kind, tired, distant. He wrote volumes on God, love, and hope, but his reign will forever be shadowed by one thing: not what he said about theology, but what he didn't say fast enough about abuse. Then came Pope Francis. You enter a courtyard, warm light spills across cobblestones. Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Argentina, chose to live not in the papal palace but in a small guest house. He took the bus with cardinals, wore simple shoes, called himself a pastor among people. From the start, he promised reform. He spoke directly of the crisis, said priests who abuse children are committing sacrilege. He established commissions, held summits, forced resignations. He changed canon law to define and punish cover-ups more clearly. He was the first pope to use the word genocide for the church's own failings, and yet, you walk past protest signs scattered across an imagined plaza. Words are not enough. Where are the criminal charges? Justice delayed is justice denied. Survivors marched in silence while cardinals argued about jurisdiction. Apologies were issued while victims aged in therapy lines. Reports kept surfacing from Ireland, from Australia, from Pennsylvania, from Poland, from Chile. You move past a touchscreen display, each tap opening another wound. A school where abuse was systemic, a bishop who shielded the guilty, a diocese that declared bankruptcy to avoid settlements. Francis said it grieved him, and you believe him, but grief doesn't equal change. In 2021, a report revealed hundreds of thousands of abuse victims in the French church alone. That same year, Francis met with survivors in Slovakia and Hungary. He wept with them, prayed with them, and still people asked, where were the reforms? Why was justice still partial? Historians still argue, is Francis a transformative pope, or simply another steward who apologizes eloquently while structures stay intact? And then came the letter. In 2018, former Vatican diplomat Carlo Maria Vigano released a letter accusing Francis of covering for Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, an American cardinal who had been abusing seminarians for decades. Vigano demanded the Pope resign. Francis stayed silent for weeks, then said simply, I will not say a single word about this. Judge for yourselves. You pause beneath a bronze statue of Peter, keys in hand, feet worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims kissing them. You wonder, what does it mean to lead a church where forgiveness is sacred, but justice is slow? You walk forward into a quiet alcove. On the wall, etched in stone, a single phrase from Francis. The church must humbly and courageously acknowledge the truth and seek forgiveness, but that is not enough. Justice must follow. You sit with that. The worst popes in history were often defined by their silence, but the best ones so far are defined by how far they're willing to go past it. Francis is still alive, still leading, still apologizing, still being tested, and the church, it keeps going. Limping, yes, but going, because even wounded faith still beats. Even after silence, even after sin, you rise. A door ahead leads toward the final room, a quieter one filled not with records or robes, but with rest. But before you step through, let this settle. You've walked with popes who waged war, who loved power, who feared truth, and with those trying still to rebuild what they inherited, broken. The church is not one man. It never was, but the papacy, it tells us more than anything what men do when the world believes they speak for God. You've just walked with Benedict and Francis, and the weight of truth is still being measured. Section 20. The corridor narrows one final time, not out of fear or secrecy, but reverence. You've walked through 1,000 years of scandal, silence, indulgence, ambition, and sorrow. But now the lights dim for a different reason, not because something is hidden, but because something is ending. This is not the chamber of another corrupt pope. It is not a vault, nor a court, nor a crypt. It's something gentler, quieter, a long stone room with no gold, no painted ceiling. Just a wooden bench, a single candle, and time to breathe. You sit, you've met the warriors and the whisperers, the poets and the princes. The ones who made art and the ones who burned it. You've seen papal sons riding into war under banners they shouldn't have touched. You've passed tables where grace was sold and archives where sin was sealed in silence. You've walked with Pius XII through the breathless quiet of wartime diplomacy. You've sat with Benedict beneath the weight of too many unopened letters. You've listened to Francis pray through a wound that still bleeds in every continent. And yet, through all of it, the church did not fall. How? Why? You glance toward the candle. Its flame doesn't flicker. It simply stays. Maybe that's the answer, because for every pope who lost his way, there were thousands who didn't, priests who stayed, nuns who carried the poor, teachers who taught, healers who healed, parishioners who lit their candles without ever reading a headline. The worst popes in history are not the story of the church, but they are part of it. Their failures remind us that even holiness, once institutionalized, can be tempted, that robes and titles do not sanctify a man, and that sometimes it's not the wolves at the gate, but the sheep in shepherd's clothing, that do the deepest harm. Historians still argue, they will for centuries more. Some say the church is a relic. Others say it is renewal itself. But you've walked its long hallway now. You've heard the whispers in its corners. And here's what you know, the truth doesn't echo loudly. It settles, slowly. It lives in paper, in voices, in silence. In stone, you rise now, your hand brushes the wall as you pass. You do not need another pope to judge, not tonight, not ever. You pass into the final space. It's not a throne room, not a cathedral. It's a simple stone cloister, open sky above, the stars returning. And with them, the stillness that says, enough for now, you've made it, you've walked with them all. And you're still here, still breathing, still listening, still learning. The air is soft now, slower. Each breath feels deeper than the last, like your body has finally remembered something it had forgotten, how to rest. You've travelled far tonight, through ages of power, silence, glory, and ruin. Through candle-lit cathedrals and vaults lined with names too long remembered. Through voices that prayed and others that whispered, let that all fade now. Let the names soften at the edges, let the candles flicker out one by one. The worst popes in history were never monsters. They were men. Some tried to do good and failed, others didn't try at all. Some were too ambitious, some were too afraid, and some were simply tired. But behind each one you saw something else, a church still standing, not always noble, not always right, but still singing its prayers, still ringing its bells, still showing up at dawn when no one is watching. Because the church, like you, is more than its worst day. So now lie back, let the stone beneath your feet grow warm in memory. Let the air above you stretch wide and quiet. You are not in Rome now, you are somewhere safer. Somewhere softer. The popes are gone, the voices are quiet. The only sound is your breath and the slow turning of the world outside your window. You did not need to be a scholar to understand them. You only needed to listen, so thank you for listening. Let sleep take you gently now. Let the light fade, let the stories drift, and let peace find you quietly at last.